Hi, hello. I'm Carolyn Yoder, editorial director of Calkins Creek Books, and I'm here with Barb Rosenstock, the author of American Spirits. So, first off, Barb, could you just maybe tell everybody a little bit about the book and how you came to write it?
All right. Well, it's a book about three sisters who heard a spirit in the days before the Civil War and became very famous for being mediums. And I just like to kind of say it's a true ghost story and pretend that either like the Kardashian or the Hadid sisters were spirit mediums before the Civil War. And that's, you'll get an idea of how famous they were, how well known they were. And it's basically a story of their lives and how it changes the country and how the idea of spirits in America changes their own lives too. So,
And spiritualism and mediums are still kind of in vogue now. So, it's very relevant to young readers today, wouldn't you say?
yeah. Yeah. They're all, I mean, I kind of think that they're always in vogue. I mean, I am, back in the day when I was in like middle school and high school, we kind of all did the Ouija board and the spiritualism things. So I just think that kids are real curious, not just kids, but young people are real curious about what comes after. And I'm not so sure that any of us lose that curiosity, even into adulthood. I mean, it's life's greatest mystery, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's
So,
absolutely, a true ghost story couldn't be better.
yeah.
Anyway, you are quite well known for writing picture books, quite celebrated in that field. And this is your first foray into long nonfiction. So, why now? Why this book? And so, tell us a little bit about how you came to write it and why it's in long form.
Well, first of all, I don't think I would have written it without you. I have to be really honest. um, I ran across uh, the story of the Fox sisters when I was researching a picture book. And I was up in upstate New York for a completely different project and wound up going to this little town called Hydesville, which is where they're from, and just kept learning more and more about them. And it almost became a hobby because I had no real confidence that I'd be able to write a long form book. I just collected like three of the shelves behind you, two of the shelves over there are full of Fox Sisters and spiritualism information that I just started collecting,
Yeah.
reading, collecting, and thinking, picture book? Well, no, impossible. The subject matter, just what it was about, the fact that the girls were already in their teens when the book started, when the story started, it just didn't fit the picture book format. And I didn't have a lot of confidence that I'd be able to do anything else. And then one day, a friend of mine, Barb Curley, who's also an author of more than picture books and other material for young children, basically dared me to write you a proposal. She said, "Well, who would publish this book in your ideal world?" And I said, "Well, the only person that I have worked with long enough to trust to like kind of push me through this first time writing long form is Carolyn Yoder." And she said, "Well, write her a proposal." And I said, "I can't." And she said, "I dare you. I dare you to write a proposal about this book." And so, kind of like we were at a middle school sleepover, literally, I said, "Fine, I take that, dear Barb Curley. I'm going to go write a proposal." And obviously, you read it and liked it. And kind of that's where it started.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, it hooked me right from the beginning. And the thing that I think I know you worked hard on it because we worked hard on it together, um, was the fact that it really reads like fiction. I know people say that, in strong nonfiction, oh, it reads like fiction, but this really does. It reads almost like a true Gothic romance from the times, and they're fascinating characters. And I think people would like to know a little bit about. I know you went to Rochester and all of that, but why the Fox sisters? What really made them um, so fascinating that you wanted to spend? I forget how long you spent writing and researching this. I know it's over a year or 2 years,
yeah.
um, or three.
Yeah.
Um, so by the time it comes out, which is April 15th, 2025. Anyway, tell us a little bit about why they are so fascinating and why you want to spend so much time with them.
Well, part of it, honestly, is that they're sort of like historical ghosts themselves.
Mm.
As someone who researches history, a lot of times we kind of look for like, wow, there's a lot of information that's so great, and then we sort through. But in
Mm.
this case, it was kind of like, what a cool story. Okay, so these sisters come out of nowhere, and they started kind of almost immediately reminding me of like TikTok kind of influencers, or
Mm.
like some kid that's in their bedroom and just has this idea for a song or a piece of art or something, and then just kind of now they can just put it out on the internet. But these girls were like in the middle of nowhere, and they had this experience, for lack of a better word, and they began to tell other people about it, starting with their parents, and then kind of like that whole rumor thing began happening. And that to me was fascinating, that even long ago, we haven't changed that much.
Mm.
And rumors get started and people add to them. And the next thing you know, there you have three teenage celebrities, basically. So that was the part of the story that I think drew me in right away. I was like, wow, they came from nowhere and they became this big deal.
Mm.
Now I want to go see what they had to say about it. And the problem is that they basically said nothing about it. So in terms of, firsthand accounts from the sisters themselves, it basically doesn't exist. And so then it became a real research challenge for me of like, well, how do you write a story about people who basically never talked about themselves? Like where, yeah, what happened? And it wasn't easy.
Yeah. And
As
I
you well
probably
know.
kept on asking, are you sure? Are you sure? Are you sure? That kind of thing. And
Right.
I think one of the things that was challenging in the research, if I remember correctly, was sort of placing them in their world, in their context when they lived and sort of weaving around, pre-Civil War, Civil War, and all of that time. So talk a little bit about that's kind of how you shaped their story by going, sort of elsewhere to tell their story, not just them.
Right, right. Well, I would say that you shaped that story because I at some point I just had a big fat mess.
Mm.
But that's a lot of what writing is, whether it's picture books or long form. I mean, it is just like I always think that writers just make their own clay. If you're a
Mhm.
sculptor, you go buy clay. But writers have to make their own clay, and then we just spend a lot of time going, yeah, what are we gonna do with it now? Um, for the Fox sisters, because there was so little from the three sisters themselves. Um, it just became really important to connect them with today's readers
Mm.
through the times. And the more that I would say that you encouraged me to do that, the more the story actually came to life, because it kind of strangely turns out that the times we're living in now and the times that were right before the Civil War were really had a ton of similarities.
Yeah.
Stop me if you remember more of them, but there was kind of in the middle and then just after a major pandemic.
Right.
We had tons, probably this is probably the second biggest era of political division
Mhm.
since those times now. I mean, really, kind of clearly the country is kind of a half and half divided.
Mhm.
What else did we have?
You
There was
have
a
fake
lot of
fake news. I mean,
yeah, a
you
lot of fake news. A lot of people not being able to tell, new medias, new technologies, people not being able to tell, like, well, wait a minute, I used to get my news from there, but maybe I should be getting it from over here.
yeah.
Um,
Also, I
we
think
had,
people were looking for back then. I mean, there was um, a lot of people looking for comfort and consolation and um, dealing with sort of family history or death and dealing with the whole grieving process, which I think is very prevalent to today as well.
right, right. Yeah, there's a lot in common. Um, so weaving in, which I finally learned to do.
It's hard. It's probably the hardest thing, I'll say.
you know I because I really did at some point, I think, have sisters that were just like kind of a, here's their story floating in space, we have no idea where they're at. And that's what a good editor does, is go like, by the way, we don't know where they're at. So it became important. But I think the more that we did that, the more that I was able to touch on the relevant history and the history that might be interesting still to kids, to young people today. The more that we could weave the girls into like their real lives and why they might have chosen to not write down lots about their lives for anyone,
Yeah,
because at some point they too were like influencers. And, you don't always get the truth of a celebrity life, because
right.
it's not part of the image. So that became something that was kind of really fascinating to me about the book too, about the story in general, is that, that whole image, the idea of image making has been
Mhm.
around for way longer than I understood in America,
Yeah,
way longer.
absolutely. And also, the book has a great kind of tormented, if that's the right word, love story sort of woven in there, which was fabulous. Which, at times I was like, well, I don't know, maybe we're going too off, and then I like, no, this is really great. So,
Yeah.
um, a couple of love stories put in there. So
Right, right. Well, it's the truth. I mean, and again, it was kind of like that celebrity love story. I mean,
right,
the country was interested in what these three sisters were doing, including who they were seeing, why they were seeing them, how much were they seeing them, And I mean, we have entire media channels and entire entire sections of the internet just devoted to that still today. I just hadn't realized that it started in America so early.
right.
you know
And also, one of the things I noted when I called it earlier, sort of a gothic novel, but that kind of era is so kind of popular today with the Gilded Age on HBO. I think it's on HBO, I'm not positive. But anyway, that kind of period drama is really very popular with, all kinds of readers. And I think one thing about American Spirits is it's geared to young adults, but it really is a great read for all ages up, I would say.
yeah, yeah, I hope so. I mean, I kind of like to read a lot of that. I'm
Mhm.
kind of a, not necessarily gothic romance, but I read a lot of narrative history or a lot of historical fiction. And I do always like, I have a thing about that era, basically from like 1820 to 1910 is like
Mhm.
my sweet spot. And that's
Yeah,
kind of when the girls, when the Fox sisters, that's their times.
yeah,
And I just feel like I just learned so much too. I mean, as a writer, I learned so much, not only about how to put a story together, but just about how we're kind of redoing some things that this country already kind of did before. So
yeah. It's
it
funny
was great.
how history isn't old and dusty and remote. It is rather relevant. That's why I've been doing it for so long, is that, it's fascinating to find the past sort of comes up and bombards us at times.
Right, right. Well, because we're still living it. I mean,
Right.
we tend to all think of history as like a thing that famous people did, like
Hmm.
there were, like as if six guys got together to make history, like,
They did.
and
They
that's
did. No,
just,
I'm joking.
I mean, kind of if you're reading enough books, it kind of seems like six guys did only get together, but in actual fact, I mean, history is just all of us together
Right.
living in our lives and, and doing what we do. And some people stick out a little more than others. But, history is also all the workers who were doing the work and all the bridge builders who were building the bridges and all of that.
Yeah.
So
But this
it,
has, this is really a great mystery story. It's got intrigue, it's got mystery, it's got romance, it's got despair. It's really, it encompasses so much. And I think that's what makes it a rich read, so to
thanks.
speak.
It reminded me of my teenage years. That's basically it's kind of
Yeah,
at some point I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm kind of without really thinking it through. At some point, I'm like, this is exactly, what it felt like.
Mhm.
There was all that first love and despair, and it is kind of overly dramatic. I mean, the writing of the era was very dramatic to
Yeah.
our ears and eyes right now, which was another challenge actually in doing the research is I mean, just some of the way the Victorians wrote, it's tough to
Yeah,
slog through. I'm like,
it
oh,
is.
Lord, get to the point, you know?
And that's why I think you did a good choice of, quotes, using them throughout your narrative, because it is sometimes hard to weave even them in, because they can sort of stand out. But you did a good job of sort of smooth sailing through the quoted material and your material. And that's really an art form.
Well, thanks. You
Um,
helped a lot.
but one of the things, I know the research, took you, a field, afar, whatever, and through books. But also, I wanted to talk about the photographs because they're a big part of the book. And you really did it. You did a wonderful job. I think you sort of collected them even as you were writing, if not before. And I think people would be interested in sort of what went into the selection and, how you really went about doing it. Cause I know it took a lot of time.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks in part to you guys' staff too, but um got most of those like done. But I just basically, when I said that I had a collect, that I had been collecting the Fox sisters, I've been collecting anything I could find.
Mm.
There's not a ton of photos, or even illustrations about the three sisters of Maggie, Kate, and Leah themselves. But just became a wow, does this have something to do with spiritualism? I'm throwing it in a file. I'm throwing it in a
Mm.
file. So I just did that. I also met a few experts, and kind of interesting characters who are into collecting this stuff too, who like the kind of that whole steampunk
Mm.
era visually, and people who collect old great things related to graveyards and spiritualism and death,
Mm.
which sounds morbid, but is actually completely fascinating. Some of the best visual images that I've ever seen. So I just started trying to understand it from a visual sense. It helps me a lot as a writer, especially when you're writing about a time that was so far ago.
Mm.
I have to see it somehow. Maybe I'm not as good of an imaginer as I think. So I just need all of that visuals to
Mm.
be able to write. Um, so one of my favorite photos was actually the first time that I know you called it the spooky-eyed photo of the two sisters,
Yeah.
Maggie and Kate. And there's something about that photo. It was taken by a very famous photographer in St. Louis. And two things about that struck me. One is how far they have come from being dirt poor.
Mm.
Um, because it is obvious from their clothing how wealthy they are at the
Mm.
time. And the second thing is how utterly terrified they both look,
Yeah.
for different reasons. And again, the reasons in the book, I left a little bit of a mystery. I mean, it's
Mm.
kind of up to young adult readers or any readers to decide where they fall,
Mm-hmm.
in the belief skeptic continuum in the book.
Right.
So I just think it's interesting that is one photo for sure that just stuck out. Other ones that I love are the blue collar victim.
Mm. Oh, I love that
Who
one.
knew?
She's like,
And she just blew,
yeah.
laying there blue.
Yeah.
Um, I just think it's funny that like people, I guess I hadn't realized that an illustration in a newspaper would have been actually it would have been so important that it would have been done in color so that people could actually see,
Yeah.
hey, you see a blue person? They probably have color on.
They're sick,
Um,
really.
yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, were there any others that you like really liked that you really thought were interesting?
I mean, I like the fact that you really, again, sort of putting their world, in the photo so kids can, relate to it. I mean, there are things like, there's ghosts or people doing, sort of seancey things. Um, I think there's one of the way people sort of operated. I mean, that's not the most exciting photograph, but it shows like what people use to sort of conjure the mediums along
Right.
with seance tables, that kind of thing. So, yeah.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I thought it was important to actually include a variety from like the believer side, like what the
Mm-hmm.
believers were looking at and what the skeptics were looking at. And,
Right.
say, what do you think? Uh,
Mm-hmm.
And I just think it's always really important now. And I was really appreciative that Astra chose to go the route. We could have done the book with no photos.
Yeah.
And I think that, with young kids seeing so much visually, I think it helps them into the era to
Yeah.
see visuals like that too.
I agree. I mean, and I also sort of going back to that side story of the romance. I mean, the Arctic explorer, because that was the time of big Arctic exploration. It's sort of like our space now. So that's another sort of relevant thing, connection.
Yeah.
And those were fascinating about him and his, love for one of the Fox sisters. I won't
Yeah.
spoil it,
Yeah,
but
we have there's a big celebrity romance, and yeah, the Arctic exploration stuff is it's just really cool. And it had to go in the book because you had to find out why one of the sisters was like so enamored of this older man who um was kind of a jerk, but he was kind of our hero. So
Mhm.
and I just think, again, speaking of having been a teenage girl, you kind of always like the like kind of jerky ones for a while
Yeah.
sometimes.
And you kind of like want to believe that person, you know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like, oh, he
yeah,
really does truly love me. And, he's
yeah. He
got,
loves me. Does he really love me?
yeah, I mean, family problems, and
Right,
whatever.
right. There was a lot of stuff, his
Yeah.
past love life, his
Yeah.
who was he really aligned with? What does he really want from her? There was a lot in that story that I just thought was relevant, not only to what it was relevant to young readers today, but it was also relevant to what actually wound up happening to Maggie as her life
Absolutely.
continued.
Yeah.
Because yeah, it's
No, that's
quite
what
a
I mean when
tragedy.
I was editing it. I'm like, why are we spending so much time on it? But then again, he also suffered from fame, and their relationship really sort of totally affected her and totally affected her future,
Right.
without saying
Right.
too much.
And
But
isn't it interesting that you said suffered from fame?
yeah,
Because most teens now, and I know most adult, I mean, I think a lot of adults, I hear a lot of people, and I probably had a little bit of this at some point myself. I want to be famous. Like maybe I can
mm,
be famous for something, right? And nobody or a lot of people don't take into consideration what that really means for a life, for
yeah,
your regular life,
yeah,
how you can be world famous, but that means that you're going to limit your life in a lot of ways that you don't realize. It
absolutely.
gives you a lot, it takes away a lot. And I think the book, we both try to really hard to do a balance of
Mhm.
why would they have wanted this, or why do teens in general, or even adults want this thing, fame, celebrity,
Right.
and what does it really do to you? And what
Yeah.
does it do to your relationships? And what does it do to your work life? And just what is it? What's
Yeah.
fame?
And it really hits home in the book. I mean, and for many people, I mean, but especially for them, I mean, it basically ended up destroying their lives. And so, yeah, which has, again, so many relevant overtones. But I'm going to back to something that you said earlier. You talked about experts that you work with. Tell us a little bit about who are the people that you sort of leaned on as part of your, research, and, maybe some of the interesting people you've met along the way that kind of tie into the book.
Yeah, well, there are a lot of people at a lot of little museums around this country. That's all I can say. And those people do fabulous work.
I used to be
Um,
one.
were you really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, I was a director of the a New Hampshire Antiquarian Society. So I
Very
know
good.
I know those places well. Anyway, go on.
They well, from people at the Rochester Library, not a small institution, to people at, tiny little town historical museums. I had a fashion expert show me around a collection in her home by video of
Yeah.
what the Fox sisters might have been wearing at the time. So I really think it's important, even if certain things don't wind up in a book, for me to understand, well, what were they wearing? What were they eating? And you never know, because you never know when you're researching what you're going to use. So
Mhm.
you may as well just try to like learn as much as you can, and then you'll sort through when you can. Um, The Philadelphia Library
Mhm.
Company. Is that the
Yep,
name?
that's the name of it.
Philadelphia Library Company was wonderful in terms of images of Elisha.
Oh, that's it. Elijah Kane.
Elijah
We got it.
King.
Yay.
I don't know.
Finally.
Uh,
Mhm.
yeah, of Elisha Kane, because that's where he was from, Philadelphia. So that's where most of his stuff and his family stuff wound up. Um, it, I just can't. I mean, I don't. There is a list in the book of everybody who helped, and it is a long one, couple of paragraphs, really. Also had a couple of mentalists and magicians help, which was very interesting. One of whom met me in Chicago. One of them, a couple of them were long distance, but one was here where I am in Chicago, and actually met me for a cup of coffee, and we talked about the Fox sisters, and he talked a little bit about seance performance, what that is
Mhm.
as a profession. And he was literally being pretty honest about, there are things psychologically that we all, think are mysterious, but really once you learn the techniques, it's pretty obvious, that people can get information out of each other that isn't
Mhm.
from the spirits. It's basically just information. But then at the very end, he did kind of like a trick with me where his business card was on my phone, and I freaked out. I mean,
Oh
so
my
at the
God.
end of the experience, I just was like, wait, so are you saying you can talk to ghosts? I don't get it. Um, so there's
And
some
did he
really
answer?
cool.
Did he answer?
No,
Oh,
he said professional secret, right?
oh, okay.
And one of the things that I actually thought was really cool, which is why I didn't come down on one way or the other on whether spirit belief is, true or false,
Mhm.
is he said, even as someone who does this for a living, who's a performer, who knows he's a performer, who
Yeah.
knows the techniques that he's doing, he has had the experience where he will just sort of blurt something about someone and it turns out to be absolutely in detail true. And
Wow.
there's no way he feels that he could have known that.
Hmm.
For example, he'll, doing a show, he'll say, you drive a truck and you were just in a massive accident and it had something to do with the three wheels on the back of your truck and the
Oh
person
my
is
word.
away. Yes. Now he said, how I'm getting that information, I don't know. I would tell you, even as someone who he says he's a skeptic, but he
Mhm.
said there are things that have happened to me, and all of the mentalists said this. There are things that have happened over and over that I'm like, but what is that one? What about
Mhm.
that one experience, right? So, I think if we're really being honest about nonfiction,
Mhm.
since none of us have been to the other side,
That's
I
true.
don't know that we can really say.
Well, no, probably not. But at one point when I was in a car, I got hit by a car, and I did see the tunnel and the light. So I kind of buy into that, and it was a very peaceful experience. And then I was brought back. So I've kind of been there in a way, and
Oh,
I'm kind of a believer. Some days, most days, I would say.
yeah,
How's that?
yeah,
One thing I remember is at the beginning of the book when you started, there was an experience or you did a nod out to your grandfather, and maybe you could share that story. I think people would find that fascinating because it kind of ties into
yeah. Well, my grandfather
mediums
is
and
it does. My grandfather is so important to me because actually I keep a picture, literally keep a picture of him. There he
ah
is, right
ah it's
there. That's
cute.
3-year-old
Wow.
me. There's Grandpa Stan. You see how
Ah,
he's talking to me? Because he was
yep.
always telling stories. He
Hmm.
is the reason I'm a writer. He was not a very educated, I think I only educated up to about the sixth grade. Went to work then, but he just was a fabulous storyteller. And so when I am ever stuck as how to talk to young people or kids, I think, how would he have done this? And then I go ahead, and usually there's a little voice of his in my head. But what happened to me is about 20 years ago, it was a long time ago now. I was at a neighborhood party and someone just had a psychic as like the entertainment. They also had a sketch artist. There was just stuff there. It was a big birthday and they had entertainment. And I went into this psychic thinking, yeah, okay, And the very first thing she said, oh, there's an elderly relative who wants to speak with you. And I thought, yeah, all right, whatever. Of course, look at how old I am. Of course, my relatives would be elderly. Of course, they'd be old.
Good start. Good start.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, okay. And she said, his name begins with S. And I didn't at first think of my grandpa Stan.
Mm.
I was like, okay, S. That's a pretty common, that's common letter. Like if she would have said X and been right, that's hard. And I was like, S, cool. And she goes, but it's Sam. No, it's not Sam. It sounds exactly like Sam. And then I started thinking, Stan? But I didn't say it out loud on purpose. I was trying to be like, I'm not telling you nothing, lady,
Right.
not telling you nothing. And I was like, huh. She goes, Stam. I mean, she was bumbling around the word Stan, but not ever getting it. And then she said to me, he's coming to you. He really loved you. Again, kind of a typical one. But then
Right.
she said, he has something wrong. There's something wrong with his face, or there's something unusual about his face. It's like it's two different colors. Now, what's so odd about this, and I don't know if you can really tell this from this photo, but my grandfather had vitiligo.
Oh yeah, I know. Yeah. Yeah.
So his face really was two different colors.
Yeah.
He was all, and it was mostly on his face. It was his face and his hands that were most affected, and his upper arms. And so that started to kind of freak me out. I was
Mm.
like, wait, and then I was like, huh. And then I listened to the rest of her, communication, which was all about, he loves that have sons and you're doing a great job as a mom. And the rest of it was fairly generic. But there
Mhm.
was something about that idea of my grandpa having vitiligo and her coming up with that detail
Mhm.
that has always really just stuck with me. And I kind of left the room really feeling wonderful, like
Yeah.
peaceful.
Yeah.
Um,
That's incredible, really.
oh, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know
Well,
what that is.
it started you on your journey, so it's a good thing. And he was over your shoulder, by your side.
Older. And honestly, the book is being published bizarrely, because I know you could have known this, the week that he will be 125 years old. So right on his
Wow.
birthday week. I think
Uh,
it's the day right after his birthday. It's April 14th.
nice,
Yeah.
nice. Um, one of the things I wanted to ask you, since this is a young adult novel, sorry, true ghost story.
Yes.
What do you hope kids will get from the book? What's your, not necessarily your mission, but what do you hope young readers will take away from the book, or besides the great writing and everything else? But what do you want them to, digest from it, I guess?
Um, how we, I think that the whole idea of truth and lies is obviously really important now. The internet, this new technology, this major new technology that we are living through right now, is making that more and more clear. But people, Americans in general, but people all over the world have been dealing with the idea of what's the truth, what's a
Mhm.
lie, how do I tell the difference
Right.
forever, right? Um, certain tech, I think that I just really hope that the story itself and the way that I hope that we together, all of us on the team who produced the book, decided to tell the story, that we take kids, the readers through a journey of what is the, how, is this the truth or is this the truth? And
Mhm.
how are you, reader, going to decide for yourselves? Where's the evidence here for your skepticism, or where's the evidence for your belief? Um,
Mhm.
so I just think that it's just a really important conversation. What I really want to happen, I want kids to be entertained by this book. I want any teachers or adults who are reading it to also be entertained. First of all, it's a
Mhm.
pretty entertaining story, so I hope that'll happen. But I want there to be discussion about truth
Yeah.
and lies, and how how does the media contribute to that? How
Mhm.
do we, as gossiping humans as we all are, how do
Mhm.
we contribute to those discussions? And what happens to someone who's caught on the other side of a lie or a
Mhm.
truth? And, and I think that a lot of teens can relate to that, being caught on the other side of, I didn't mean to say that, or why are you saying that about me?
Right, exactly. Especially in this day of,
Right,
big social media and stuff.
right, right. I mean, it was interesting because I really think that these three sisters were social media influencers.
Mhm.
It was just a different kind of media in a different time.
Yeah, the thing that I also think, we've talked about it a few times, is, timelessness. I mean, how reading this story isn't like, oh, I'm going to read like a story set in the past. This is a history book
I hope
that I
not.
have to read. It's just a really good read, and, that's why, that's one of the things that, we strive at Calkins Creek and that you do so well, and the book does so well. So, hopefully kids will come to love the story and love the writing. And, I would imagine that's what you hope, you know, kids will ultimately walk away from, that they'll love the book.
That they'll love the book and that they'll just all of that spooky stuff that we're interested in is also just so human. And
Yeah.
that all of the feelings that were happening before the Civil War in America um, have been happening before that and ever since up till to now. Like teenagers, I mean, teens, people going through, before they're adults or even after they're adults, the feelings that human beings have don't change.
Oh,
Sometimes I think kids think history is like, a bunch of people back there doing stuff I have nothing to do with, but
right.
honestly, the feelings didn't change. They still fell in love. They still wondered who liked them and who didn't like them. They still didn't like when people were gossiping about them, but were perfectly happy to gossip about their own friends.
Which doesn't
All of
really
those,
change much the older you get. But,
nothing
being
changes.
a teenager has such an impact on your life that even if you're an adult, you remember those
Oh
times.
my
They
goodness.
stay with you. I mean, absolutely. Slumber
Honest.
parties, Ouija boards, boards,
Boys, what's a
boys, whatever. I mean,
musical
they're
artist?
implanted in your psyche, whether or not you like it or not. It's true.
Exactly. Exactly. And it's still
So
interesting. It really is. I mean, it's just um yeah, and I mean I really thank you for guiding me through it though too because it was my first time and it is
it's
people say
hard.
it's different. It's
Yeah.
different tough.
But it's hard. It's hard. It really is hard work. I don't think people out there realize how much work goes into, writing, researching, putting the book together, designing the book. All of that takes a concentrated effort.
Yeah. And it does have
So,
such a fabulous cover too. I love it. And you guys
yeah.
didn't know this, but purple's my favorite color. This whole office is purple. Can you tell?
Well, yeah,
And I didn't paint it to match the book. It was
it's interesting is Sarah, who's British, um, when we asked her to do the cover, because she's kind of known for doing like these spooky covers type of thing. And she knew all about the Fox sisters. And she was like a fan. She was like, "Oh yeah, I'm just count me in. I'm doing this." And um, so I think she really sort of set the tone for the book as you enter the book. It was perfect. So she turned out to be the perfect illustrator for the book.
Yeah, she certainly did. She
Yeah.
certainly did. Yeah.
Well, anyway, this was a fabulous chat with the fabulous Barb Rosenstock. I'm Carolyn Yoder from Calkins Creek. American Spirits will be out April 15th, 2025. Available at every place you can imagine. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Carolyn.
You're welcome, Barb.